Hey guys, it's Archon, and in this video we're going to be talking about what I believe to be hands down the best build for Wizards since 1.0.4 came out. Now most of you guys are probably already familiar with this build. It is the critical mass build, but we've had to make a few alterations since the patch came out because they did nerf Energy Twister. So first we're going to be talking about the build itself, what skills to use. Then I'm going to be showing you the strategy of the build, how to do the rotation, and then I'll finish up with the gear you're going to need if you want to do this build. So starting with skills, this build is going to rely on the passive critical mass to bring your cooldowns down. Every time you get a crit, your cooldown's going to go down by 1 second, and this build's going to allow you to cast spells over and over again even though they have a cooldown. And the main skill you're going to use to bring your cooldowns down is Energy Twister, because it gets a lot of ticks. Now in 1.0.3, they nerfed the proc coefficient on Energy Twister, which means it procced critical mass less, as well as life on hit, arcane power on crit, and all that. So it really did damage the build. However, for some reason, Storm Chaser was not altered. In fact, it looks like Storm Chaser actually procs more than Wicked Wind did before the patch, and Wicked Wind was the popular one in 1.0.3. So for 1.0.4, you definitely want Energy Twister with Storm Chaser on there. No doubt about it, this is going to give you a ton of procs, bring all your cooldowns down, give you life on hit, and all that jazz. Now, your second skill is going to be Explosive Blast with Chain Reaction. It doesn't matter where you put these skills, this is just where I have them. Chain Reaction is going to give you 3 more ticks, and it's going to do you a lot of damage. Diamond Skin on there is going to keep you alive. Frost Nova is going to keep them chilled the whole time. You want Crystal Shell on Diamond Skin. You can play around with some other ones if you want to, but Crystal Shell will give you the most defense. For Frost Nova, I like to use Bone Chill for the extra damage, but you could also use Deep Freeze for the extra crit chance if you want to. It's just, the problem is sometimes you can't get 5 targets frozen and it might wear off, but you can play around with both and decide which you like most. The other one you could try with Frost Nova is Cold Snap if you're having a hard time getting the cooldowns down. Now this skill right here is kind of a wild card. I'm going to come back to it. But you definitely want Energy Armor with Prismatic Armor. If you have really low defense, you might want to try Force Armor, but I think Prismatic Armor is definitely the way to go. Cold-Blooded on here, because of course your targets are going to be frozen most of the time. You might as well get that extra 20% damage. I have Glass Cannon. You're only going to want to put this on here if you're not dying very much, give you a little boost of damage. But the other option would be Evocation to bring your cooldowns down, Blur, so you take less damage from melee, or you can play around with some other ones. But those are probably going to be the 2 big ones, Evocation or Blur. And then of course you have to have Critical Mass, because that's what the build is relying on. Now this skill right here, all wizards do something different. There's a lot of different skills you can put here, and it changes up the build just slightly. I've been using Force Weapon a lot just to give you a little extra damage boost. Some people like to use Familiar with Spark Flint to get the same damage boost. There's some other runes on Familiar you can also use. Mirror Image works there to give you a little bit of evasion, and you can use Mocking Demise on there if you want to get the extra stuns. Recently, people have been using Archon with Arcane Destruction to have an occasional explosion for just a ton of damage. It has 1600% weapon damage now. If you use that, you're going to want to put it on and then immediately click Archon off so you can get back into critical mass, because you're pretty fragile in Archon. Even though you have that armor and resistance boost, you can still die really fast standing in the middle of mobs. If you want to leave Archon on all the time, that's cool too, but it's kind of a different build. Some other skills that people put there are, Slow Time is really good in groups because you can get buffs if you use Time Warp. You get damage buff to your group, or Stretch Time, you give a attack speed buff to your group. Teleport is really popular, mostly for survivability, just for getting out of the way before frost orbs explode, out of Desecrate, getting away from arcane lasers. Fractures popular to get those 2 decoys. Calamity just got a damage increase, but I wouldn't suggest it because it's going to push targets away from you. You kind of want targets grouped up for this. I use Wormhole a lot because it helps me get in between mobs a lot, as well as evading during fights. And some people have been using Safe Passage recently for the armor increase. It only gives it to you for 4 seconds, but because your cooldowns are coming off so fast, you can use this all the time and really keep that armor buff up. Keep in mind, all these skills with cooldowns are going to be coming down so fast that you'll be able to use them a lot. And of course, you could put Hydra in there for some extra damage boost too. I just prefer Force Weapon because I don't have to cast it every fight. Now, we're not sure why Storm Chaser works so well, so there's a chance that it could get nerfed. And if it does, there's some other skills you could use in its place. You could, of course, use Energy Twister with Wicked Wind, like in 1.0.3. Of course, the proc coefficient is less, so it doesn't work nearly as well as it used to. Some people like to use Meteor. Star Pact is probably the best one there because you can get a lot more off because it costs less. Now you're not going to get as many ticks from Meteor, but you do get more damage. Other people like to use Meteor Shower for the extra hits, but of course you're not getting the ticks on the ground, and Liquefy also for more ticks on the ground. It lasts 8 seconds instead of 3. Other people also like to use Living Lightning, the shock pulse rune, Living Lightning. It doesn't cost any arcane power, so this is good if you don't have a lot of arcane power on crit. You can actually do it without any arcane power on crit. I wouldn't suggest it, but you get a lot of ticks from Living Lightning. It's just not going to do as much damage. And of course, Spectral Blade. And you could try Deep Cuts with Spectral Blade, or there's a couple other ones you can try out. But Spectral Blade seems to work pretty well as well, and there's some other ones people use, but those are the 3 main ones you would use instead of Energy Twister. And you could replace either Energy Twister or Explosive Blast with any of those 3 spells if they nerf Storm Chaser. Now until then, if Storm Chaser stays the way it is, I really think you should use Storm Chaser. At least try it out. It works so well. I think hands down this is the best setup for the time being. So those are the skills you're going to want to be using. Now I'll go over the rotation while you're fighting. Most of the skill in Critical Mass is placement. It's not standing in somewhere you're going to get killed, very similar to most melee builds. The rotation itself is actually pretty simple. You're going to be spamming 3 buttons most of the time: Energy Twister, Explosive Blast, and Frost Nova. And you can really just spam those. Now some people have strategies. They might cast Twisters first and then start casting more Explosive Blasts later. But when you're just getting started out, I would suggest just spamming those 3 spells. Just Ripple if they're on your keyboard, Ripple them, if they're on your mouse, whatever. Just spam those as much as you can. It's going to work great. Now some people will also include Diamond Skin in that spamming. Spam all 4 of those spells. I don't like to do it because you cast Diamond Skin a lot more than you need to that way. I think the most efficient way is to only cast Diamond Skin when it falls off or when you know you're about to take a lot of damage, and then you get more casts of the other 3 spells out. And if you have enough gear, you can actually keep everything frozen 100%, just permanently frozen. Now one of the really cool things about Critical Mass is you can actually do a lot of damage per second without a lot of character sheet damage. Because you're getting so many attacks off so quickly, you're doing a ton of damage. For example, when I only had about 60,000 character sheet damage, I could still do 400,000 DPS to a single target, which is a really big increase compared to other builds. Now the damage starts off a little slow. It takes you about 2 or 3 seconds for your damage to kick in, but once it does, you can do a whole lot of damage without a lot of character sheet damage. And you're getting a lot of survivability without having a lot of survivability stats on your gear. So speaking of gear, let's go over the gear you're going to need to get this Critical Mass build working. There are 3 different types of stats you're going to want to look for when building your Critical Mass set. Stats that help the build work, stats that keep you alive, and stats that kill guys faster. And I think you should prioritize them in that order. The first thing you're going to need is stats to get the build working. And there are 3 different stats that are going to do that. The first one, of course, is critical hit chance. You're going to need high crit chance to get those cooldowns fast and to get a lot of arcane power on crit. So I would suggest having at least 30% crit chance. Now, if they do nerf Storm Chaser and you have to go back to using Wicked Wind or Meteor, Living Lightning, or Spectral Blade, you're probably going to need more than that. You might need as much as 40%. But for now, I would say bare minimum 30% to get the build up and running. And if you can get the 40%, do it. You can see I'm just under 50% right now, and it works great. The second stat you're going to need to get the build working is arcane power on crit, which actually doesn't show up on your character sheet. I have about 20 of it right now, which is a great number, but I would say bare minimum have 10. Again, if they nerf Storm Chaser, you're probably going to need at least 20. You need a lot of arcane power on crit without Storm Chaser. And the third stat you need to get the build working is attack speed. You can see I've been stacking attack speed like crazy. I have 2.44 attacks per second. You don't need nearly that much. I would try to get up to about 1.7 attacks per second. That should be good. But again, if they nerf Storm Chaser, you're going to need more attack speed. The 2 biggest things you're going to need if they nerf Storm Chaser, in case you want to prepare: extra attack speed, extra arcane power on crit. Because the biggest problem since the nerf is you can't get spells up fast enough and you're always running out of arcane power. So those are the 3 stats you need to get the build working. Now let's discuss the 4 stats you need to stay alive with Critical Mass. They are going to be all resistance, armor, vitality, and life on hit. Life on hit might actually be the most important, but we'll discuss all of them. Armor and all resistance, more than anything, are going to keep your diamond skin up. And it's going to be up most of the time, but it's going to last longer with armor and all resistance. And I think armor is probably the least valued stat. Keep in mind that 10 points of armor gives you the same benefit as 1 point of all resistance. And energy armor actually gives you a bigger increase to armor than it does to all resistance. So don't undervalue armor on gear. Think of every 10 points of armor as 1 point of all resistance. Right now, I have some pretty low armor and all resistance. I'm at about 7,000 armor and about a little over 700 all resistance. Now, I would actually suggest being around 800 and 8,000, but keep in mind, the more of those first three stats you have, the three stats that make the build work, the less of everything else you're going to need. Because the better the build's working, the longer people are going to be stun locked, and the more you're going to have diamond skin on, and the more damage you're going to be doing. So those three stats, that's why they're so important. Critical chance, arcane power on crit, and attack speed. The more you have of those, the less you need of everything else, and that's why my resistances and armor are kind of low right now. However, I would like to get them up to around 800 and 8,000. And that'll give you a pretty good defense for Act 3. If you're doing Act 2 and 1, you need a little bit less, of course. Now, vitality isn't that important for critical mass. I would say you need at least 20,000. You're going to be a little squishy with that even. I try to stay around 30,000, but it's not the most important stat. The most important survivability stat, in my opinion, is life on hit. You're getting hits like crazy with critical mass, so a little bit of life on hit goes a long way. I would suggest trying to get at least 400 life on hit, but the more the better. And you can just kind of play around with it. You know, if you're dying a lot, you can get more life on hit, more armor, more all resist. Just keep building up those defensive stats until you're not dying. That's the important thing. If you're dying a lot, you're not farming efficiently. So those are the 4 survivability stats. Next we're going to talk about DPS stats. Stats to get your damage up, to kill guys faster. And of course those are going to be intelligence and critical hit damage. So right now I'm at about 1461 intelligence. There's really no good place to be for intelligence and critical hit damage. You can see that I really need to get my critical hit damage up right now. I'm actually looking for a Chantota's Will with the socket so I can increase that by about 100%, and that will give me a huge damage boost. But whatever you're more low on, critical hit damage or intelligence, get that one up. It's going to help you more. Increasing the lower stat will give you a bigger boost overall. But again, you don't need damage to get the build working. Get the 3 stats to get the build working, then get your defense up, and then worry about doing a lot of damage, because the build doesn't work any better with more damage. It just kills guys faster. And of course, the more of those first 3 stats you have, the less of these DPS stats you're going to need, because attack speed, crit hit chance, and arcane power on crit are all going to help you do more damage. So that's the gear I recommend having for farming Act 3. If you can't get quite these high of stats yet, you might want to drop down to Act 2 or Act 1 as you build up your critical mass gear, and then once you can get to something like this, you can start farming Act 3 fairly effectively. So I hope this video has helped you guys out. Go ahead, try out this build, put the Storm Chaser rune on your energy twister, and hopefully it'll help you farm Act 3 or whatever act you're in a little more efficiently. And if you enjoy my videos, please subscribe. We're doing a huge giveaway once we hit 5,000 subscribers. It's going to be over $500 worth of Diablo gold and items, so you can help us get in there just by subscribing. I'll have another video for you guys soon. Thanks for watching.